In 2013, Liz Ryerson released Problematic, a 2D platformer made as a response to the ever-popular Braid from 2008. Now, this is not that surprising of a game to see, given that 2D platformers were everywhere in the mid-2000s, from a multitude of Mario games to Mega Man, and even the weird Red Ball games only found on CoolMathGames.com. There's even a good chance you have played some variety of 2D platformer, using the game as a way to see a story, escape from the happenings in your life at the time, or even just to build up the parkour skills that specific game offered. Problematic, however, is not this kind of platformer. The controls are slippery, the colors too bright and headache-inducing, and when you think you have finally figured out how to play, the rules change and the game doesn't tell you why or how. It's a frustrating game to be sure, and in making the player feel anger and hatred and discomfort as it progresses, the game gets exactly what it wants. At its core, Problematic is an insider viewpoint of Liz Ryerson's trauma from abuse and sexual assault as she wants it to be seen, and the game does so by enforcing a feeling of helplessness and entrapment in its players based on these same emotions from those victimized by rape culture. This is showcased in the constant text screens that tell the player, "I hate you, go fuck yourself," or the far more violent, "I hope you wake up with your guts in a pile on the fucking floor." This is what Wendy Hesford calls a revenge fantasy, or a fantasy that beckons the viewer into the territory of psychoanalysis surrounding the representation of trauma, and that is precisely what is shown in the text screens of Problematic. Problematic also showcases another one of Hesford's points surrounding the coverage of things like rape and sexual violence, where media tends to only focus on how the perpetrator was thinking, rather than the social norms that allowed this to take place. Societal structures that enable crimes like rape have taught both men and women that men inherently have more agency than women do. They do so through subtle actions like reinforcing the notion that women belong in submissive or nurturing roles and men should take on stronger, more dominant ones. This leads to women having to rely on men more because they simply have no other choice in the structure society has built, and men in turn learn to take on agency on behalf of women, strengthening these structures in a seemingly never-ending cycle. Problematic showcases this well by making the player play the same few levels over and over again, but each time the cycle repeats, the level is harder than it was before, and the game gets more violent as you try to play. The game forces the player into submission and obedience by not allowing them to leave a level once they have started it, but also getting angry if the player tries to play in a way the game wants, effectively creating the prisons Ryerson talks about in the description of the game. The same is seen in real life, where pickup artists, or men who view all women as the exact same submissive and weak stereotype, will gamify the benevolent sexism prevalent in society as a way to win sexual advances on women, regardless of how the women feel. A game's interactivity is largely placed upon how much agency a player has and what they are allowed to do, so by enforcing a structure where one group will always have more agency than the other, obstacles, like the ability to resist or having the freedom to say no, become easier to overcome. Pickup artists will use tactics like dominance and persistence to succeed at the game of rape culture, where the prize is a woman devoid of agency because they took it from her in order to win. Gamification in this sense is further enabled by hidden aspects of society, like gender essentialism, which starts to bleed into larger society via benevolent sexism. Once enough of this is normalized, people start to believe or perpetrate the idea that a person of one gender is fundamentally the same as everyone of their gender, making it much easier to manipulate these ideas to normalize the lack of agency and violence against certain groups. Rape culture, and rape itself, is scripted by these ideas, but also acts as a script in and of itself of what actions a society will allow to happen. In a society that is complicit in sexual violence, a victim's claim to agency is defined by the culturally gendered scripts available to her and those deemed socially appropriate. Rape culture enables the roles perpetrators believe themselves and their victims to fall into, but can also enable the victim to use them to gain agency when this culture is enacted upon them. It is in these gaps of agency where Problematic falls, being a way for Ryerson to take back her agency from those who hurt her, which is also the typical use of revenge fantasies for victims of sexual violence. These small breaches in the system are still products of the system, however, and often still contribute to rape culture by being the only place where victims feel they are allowed to speak. Revenge fantasies constructed from these gaps are usually violent and take away agency from the perpetrator, and in the case of accounts from Margaret Atwood's rape fantasies, can also prompt critical anxiety in viewers being placed into the role of a voyeur of these traumas. In Atwood's case, the viewer is her reader, but in Liz Ryerson's case, the viewer is the player of Problematic. Despite Atwood's critique of making revenge fantasies available to view, Ryerson avoids this feeling of anxiety in the viewer by instead replacing it with anger and frustration as they play the game. This is not only her own anger and rage at what happened to her being projected into the game, but the player's own anger at the difficult levels and lack of agency afforded to them. The angry messages throughout the game, and even the giant block of text detailing how Ryerson doesn't have the energy to forgive or be sorry anymore, are all addressed to a you. And through the lens of revenge fantasy, this you is the rapist experiencing the revenge, the structures that let this happen to her, and the complacency of society that watched it from afar and did nothing, all of which the player is standing in for. By taking away player agency in Problematic, Ryerson is able to use his power over the player to enact her revenge fantasy, effectively making the player feel as trapped and angry as she did during her abuse, and as the rapist in a revenge fantasy feels when their own violence is forced upon them. Problematic, in Ryerson's own words, is a puzzle universe of yours that only functions as well as I allow it to function for you. She uses you once again, indicating that this universe of horrid loops, puzzles that make no sense, and seemingly no escape even when you think the game is ended, is one of your own design. You built this game by contributing, whether knowingly or not, to the real prison-like structures that inspired it. Ryerson learned of these prisons by facing violence in her real life, and the player is shown these prisons by being forced to see them for what they are, suffocating and constricting barriers formed by a complicit lack of agency surrounding one's identity. The player acts as a stand-in for a rapist and societal structures and willful ignorance, not because Ryerson believes the player to be any of those things, but because the game space affords her agency she does not have in real life. She can inflict her rage and threats of violence onto the player under the guise of a video game, but the I hate yous and the go fuck yourselves and the wishes of someone waking up with their guts in a pile on the fucking floor all reflect Liz Ryerson's actual feelings about their real life representations. It only makes sense that she would place these messages above stereotypical gender symbols and a room that doesn't want you to escape, since she is expressing her anger at the prisons she's been forced into, while simultaneously making the player feel angry for being trapped in these representations too. She is infuriated by a society that has allowed trans women like her to be violently victimized far more than their cis counterparts, or for women to be seen as merely objects to be won by men. Problematic is about the prisons based on a society built off of dehumanization and benevolent sexism that feed into rape culture, and the player can only confront their own prisons once they have been stripped of their agency and forced to deal with the emotions in a game that wouldn't exist without these structures in the first place. You made this prison, and now you must tear it down or be trapped in its walls forever.